Hey guys, welcome to Doing It Dan's Way. And this week we're going to be replacing the rear brakes and the rear shocks on a 2009 G37. Now this job isn't so bad. It is a process of pulling a tire. One bolt gets you access to the brakes. It's as easy as it gets. And three nuts get you access to the rear shock. So the hardest thing about it is getting kind of the top of the shock mount off, and I'll show you a trick for that. So let's get started.
So for this project, you're going to need a couple jacks, a breaker bar and torque wrench, of course your new brakes and new shocks, a couple jack stands, and your lug wrench. Step one here, I like to raise up the front of the car on the side that I'm going to jack up. That makes it a lot easier to take weight off of the jack itself. Then on the opposite side, I'd lock the tires in nice and tight. There's a spot on the back here where there's a notch. You want to be right in that spot, just to the left or right of it. You're trying to put a jack stand in there, but just lift it up a little bit. Now what we did is I found that I accidentally lost my key. So the trick is to take a 12-point socket that's just bigger than the socket that's there. You beat it on. And it just kind of barely hooks the edge of that security lock, and then you're able to pry it off. So you find a socket that's just doesn't quite fit. In this case, I think the 3/4 inch worked perfectly. It was better than the millimeter, one size up, one size down socket that I had. It's a great thing to do with an old crappy socket, cheapy set, because it's going to potentially damage the socket to do this. But so here I went through and I found one that was the right size. Just kind of feel it, whichever one seems the most toothy, like it's just about to go on but not quite. That's kind of what I was feeling for here, trying to find the one that fit the best. And then just kind of start tapping it on there, and you'll feel it wobble around, and then the sound will actually change. You can hear it and feel it where it gets solid sounding. Feeling. It sounds like you're actually banging the lug directly at that point. Now I did this, I think a total of 3 times. This first time I had barely stuck it on there. It was not nearly strong enough. And I tried, and you'll see here it basically walked off. It just kind of slipped right off the end of the bolt there. So the basic process was to put it back on there. See, it just kind of wobbled off there. So I'll stick it back on, wail on it harder. It does kind of nick up the socket a bit. Wail on there pretty good, you'll hear. That's a 3-pound sledge, so actually I'm hitting it fairly hard. And this time it actually started to turn you can actually see the wheel kind of, I'm actually torquing the wheel here. It's moving a bit on the parking brake. Just in case I give it a few more whacks. And then finally it went. Yay! Now you can go and just loosen up the other lug nuts. Make sure you get the wrench all the way on before you start trying to put force on it. You'll twist the end of the nut off. That's what I did last time. That was my mistake. So here you just want to give it an 1/8 turn just to loosen it just a little bit before we jack it up. Now we're going to go ahead and go up. I kind of sped this up a bit, but get up and clear. Find a nice spot in back, right at the connection point between the 2 axles. It's a good place to park the jack. You only need just a slight bit of clearance there. So in this case, I left the jack in place as well as the jack stand. Just made me feel better. And then spin off that tire. So this one screw, I believe that was a 14 millimeter. That's all you need to get the brakes off. You don't have to pull off any of the large bolts at all, and this one just needs some good force. Just going to back this screw out. This is actually a greased pin that allows the brakes basically to center themselves on the rotor. So keep that guy nice and clean. And the whole brake assembly here just opens up for you. It's just that simple. So now you can see the open end of the caliper. It's a little dusty dirty there. You want to get that cleaned up before you compress it. Make sure there's no chunks of debris and stuff in there. And then the pads you can just pull out.
Actually quite a bit on there still.
Let's pop those out.
Side. On that one too. Oh wow.
Take a close look at those and see how much was left. Little tang there, you can see where that metal would start scraping the rotor. That's the squeal you hear when you touch your brakes. You know your brakes are gone when you hear that squeal, and that squeal is metal rubbing against your rotor, so you don't want to continue that at all. So to compare the new versus old brake pad, you can see how much thicker the material is on the one in my right hand versus my left there. Now, my fingers are kind of dirty, but I'm being careful not to touch those pads with any of that grease that's on my finger. So all you're going to do is just snap those, sorry for my headshot there, but snap those back in place. Back where the other ones were. That's it. Now to compress the cylinder, this is the easiest way I found. You just put the old set of pads in there just as a spacer, and you're just going to take a closed end wrench, which has a little bit of angle to it, and put that in there and pry. And what you want to do is make sure that the open end of the wrench is right in the center line. But before we do that, we do need to open up the reservoir, the brake fluid reservoir. And I'm just going to pack it around just in case it happens to overflow on me when I'm working the other end of the car, because I'm in the back right corner and this is the front left. But if you look at your levels, and if you're not already way up to the max, you'll probably be fine here. So I'll just center the opening right in the center where the cylinder is, and I'm pulling back, and it's just compressing that cylinder back. So I'm putting torque on that right closest corner to us. That's not a big deal. What you want to be doing though is pressing the cylinder right at the center line. So I'm coming back here and checking, make sure my fluid levels aren't getting too high. And then we're going to do this one more time and compress it the rest of the way. Now you only have to go as far as you need to get this to go over those thicker pads. So don't worry about jamming it all the way back to zero, because it's just going to come right back out again. So the less travel, the better. So that was enough for this to close. Get that little seal lined up again. Now grab that bolt or pin, stick some additional grease on there. This is a special grease. Just buy a little packet when you buy your pads. Just line that up and reinsert that. I guess if you want, you can pull the lower bolt out and re-grease that one if you feel like the grease level was low or it seemed dry at all. You can pull back that rubber boot on the bottom and take a look as well. Make sure there's grease up under there. You just want those nice and loose so the calipers float over the rotor. And you're just going to retorque that bolt and you're done. I mean, that's one half of your rear brake's done. So this is a picture of the lower bolt on the shock. And looking up inside there, those are the upper 2 bolts you need to get off. So this all comes apart fairly easily. You just need kind of a long socket to get all the way up inside there. And for the lower bolt, you definitely want a breaker bar. I believe it's a 17mm bolt there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosen this at first. And the order here isn't super important. What I'll be doing in a minute after I get this loosened up is I'll be jacking this up. And you can actually jack this up in advance. You do want to put some kind of jack under this to compress it a bit. Otherwise the spring will want to push the whole thing down. So I really could have done this before I did that last step. Either way, it's fine. But I'm using just a little secondary jack. I could have used my main one as well, but going right underneath the knuckle joint there and just lifting up on this whole assembly and then sticking a jack stand in there somewhere. I mean, this doesn't take a lot of force. It's just holding against the spring. But just get that to where it's up about 2 inches from where it started. That way when you release the shock, the coil spring doesn't push the whole assembly way down. So what I'm showing here is just this is a Harbor Freight 3/8 inch adapter, I believe. Just going way up inside that cavity just so I can get to it. And just walking that screw out. It's not, I mean, it pops loose and comes out pretty easily after that. Let's do that on both sides. Speed this up. I'll come back and take out that bottom bolt that I loosened up previously. And once this bolt comes out, that whole assembly is loose. And there's no popping, there's no spring-loaded action happening here. It's just you've already taken the force with that when you jacked up the unit and held it there with the jack stand. So this is just a dust cover on top that pops off. And just a little bit of a white spacer. So that whole top assembly needs to come off of the shock. So that nut we have to get out. And the trick is it's way up inside that piece. So here's my trick. Take a closed-end driver. There's a flat notch on that on the end of the shock there that you need to grab with the vise. So stick that in the vise and grab it good and tight. You need to really wrench down on that guy because it's going to twist really hard. Hold at the other end with something. What you're going to do is get that up inside there as hard as you can. And it only needs a quarter turn or so to pop, but you really got to pull pretty hard. You'll see how hard I'm straining to break it. I think I had to tighten some more. I feel like you're just twisting the heck out of it. So that took me a long time to figure out because it's so far up inside there that tool is barely hanging on. I'm sure there's a specialized tool for that, but I was able to do it with a simple standard close-in wrench. So now the whole rubber boot comes off, and if it's all in good shape, you can just reuse it. So take your new shock and prep it. And it comes with a new nut. It's got a nylon insert in it, so you just use the new one because it'll be fresh there. You can imagine the vibration this thing is under. So screw that on there. And this time I'm going to put the wrench on facing the other way at first. There's my spacer. I remember to. Has to go on kind of the wrong way the first time because there's so little of that tooth kind of hanging out there to grab onto. So I'm going to grab just the last 1/16 of an inch of that thing just to get this started. I'll speed this up here. Then spin that wrench around the other way. Tighten it down good and tight, and now you can do the exact opposite of that first step, which is to get it tight and then torque it down good and hard. And there you have it.
Okay, so now that we have this, apply this guy.
So I just need to reinstall that little spacer and the rubber boot. So that dust cap. Didn't seem like it came off awfully, kind of popped off, so I was kind of wondering if there was an edge or something, but no, it just kind of sits on there and gets compressed up inside when you mount it. So here you're just going to feed it up in there and get the bottom bolt on, and then line up the top bolts. You may have to adjust the height that you jack this thing up to get it that much easier. I think in the end I had to lift it up just a little bit. I'll leave that socket on there just to remind me that I still need to torque that down. So up in here, if it's not already up there tight, you may have to raise the whole rotor assembly. Feed this up in there and torque it down. Come back this guy and torque it. That was our first torque. I think that was 50 foot-pounds, and then we're going to go up to, I think it was 95, something like that. But definitely check the manual on all the torque ratings on your exact car. I don't really want to quote it here. I can raise that up to get the jack stand out. And get all your stuff out of the way and reinstall the tire. It's just the reverse process. You put them on as tight as you can, going opposite corners. Now you're going to raise the car up, get that rear jack pulled out of the way, lower the car down, and then tighten those bolts up. Torque those to spec. Finally, you want to check the level of your brake fluid one last time. Make sure that you're between the marks for low and high there. Siphon some out if you need to. Pump your brakes before and after you start the car, and you got yourself a fully completed process here. New brakes and new struts. You're good to go. Have a good one, guys.